one obsession. I want to be number one. One rule. You guys think you're above the law. You ain't above mine.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Screenstars. I'm here today to bring you my review on the 1988 classic Steven Seagal film, Above the Law. The film is directed by Andrew Davis, who also co-wrote the film with its star, Steven Seagal. Also starring in the film is Pam Grier, Henry Silva, Ron Dean, Daniel Faraldo, and Sharon Stone. Right, the film follows Steven Seagal's character, Nico Toscane, who we see right at the beginning of the film. We get a little bit of his backstory, about his martial arts background and things like that, and then his career in the CIA and all this kind of stuff. And at the time, everyone thought it was all, Steven Seagal speaking the truth, and it was actually his real backstory. And I think we all know better these days, but it was nice at the time to think it was legit. And then it's set in present day. After he's left the CIA, it's in 1988. He is now a Chicago cop. He is married to Sharon Stone. He has got relatives in the mafia, but he's well respected within the police force. And then he gets entangled in what he thinks is a drug bust, but it turns out it's not drugs at all. It's an explosive. It's C4. Which is very confusing. They don't know what's going on. And then he and the rest of his cops are warned to back off by the FBI, basically claiming that there's something going on behind the scenes that they don't need to know about and to just basically leave it alone. But Nico, being a good cop, refuses to do so, and he keeps on digging. And he finds a conspiracy to assassinate a senator that he has to try and stop. Right, what are my thoughts on Above the Law? Well, as you know, if you follow my content on the channel, I am revisiting a lot of classic 80s action films and action stars. I've done some for Van Damme recently, quite a few Chuck Norris, some Seagals. I'm going to be blending some others in there, maybe a few Dolph Lundgrens here and there. And I must admit, I am really, really enjoying revisiting many of these films. Quite a few of them I haven't seen for a few years. Now, Above the Law, or as it was known to me for many, many years in the UK, it was titled Nico, this, in the UK. I'm not exactly sure why. I think it clashed, Above the Law, with another title at the time in the UK, or something like that. So, certainly in this country, for a long, long time, I knew this film as Nico. I still do. It still feels a little bit strange calling it Above the Law. And this was mine and everybody else's introduction to Steven Seagal. I knew nothing of the guy, and this was his feature film debut. I think his only experience in the film industry up to this point was, I think he was some kind of fight choreographer on the Bond film Never Say Never Again, and he quite famously broke Sean Connery's wrist or something in that film. But mainly he was behind the scenes. He was like an Aikido teacher and all this kind of stuff, and apparently like this super agent, Michael Ovitz or something like that he was called, who was a former student of Seagal's, Aikido student. He was like this Hollywood super agent, and he claimed he could make anybody a star. So he's the guy that got Seagal into the movie business. And reportedly, Seagal was kind of offered a load of scripts, and many of the scripts were like scripts that either Clint Eastwood had passed on, or there were scripts being saved for Clint Eastwood. And he chose this one, and it was just kind of rewritten with him and Andrew Davis to kind of make it fit him and his so-called past better, so to speak. And to be honest, I thought it was a good choice. This is a really, really solid feature film debut for Seagal. Again, I remember at the time when this came out, I was subscribed to a magazine called Impact. I think it was called Impact in the UK. It was like an action movie martial arts magazine. So I'm not sure if it was weekly or monthly came out. I think it was monthly. And every month it'd have articles about Van Damme and Chuck Norris and Seagal and, Stallone, Arnie, all that kind of stuff. It had all these articles about these new upcoming action films, or just ones that had been released. So that was the first time I heard about this film in that magazine. And he was like, when it came out, the film was a sensation because nobody had ever seen martial arts like this in the film. Aikido, it was never before seen, and the popularity of this martial art in particular exploded after this film, after Seagal came onto the scene. And I genuinely do think this is a really, really solid film. It's a little bit overly complex, a little bit overly convoluted, but it gets there in the end, I suppose. And I think for a feature debut, I think Seagal's performance here is good. It's fine. It's just a shame that he never kind of evolved as an actor at all. It's unfortunately taken away his films from the last 10 to 15 years, where he mumbles through many of those. His films in the late 80s and much of the 90s, essentially it was like one note. It was the same character in each film pretty much. But, John Wayne got away with it his whole career. Many other actors have got away with it their whole career. I always quite enjoyed Seagal's kind of laid-back acting approach. So I think it felt natural to me for a time, until it didn't feel natural, and then it just kind of felt like there was no effort being put in later on in his career, obviously. But I thought the screen really liked him. He had a real presence on screen. He was different. He didn't look like a typical action star. He was tall. He was lanky. He was quite skinny. And he was a little bit awkward in the way he walked and moved and certainly ran. A lot of people now ridicule him for the way he runs in many of his earlier films. And you can understand why. It's an easy target, I suppose. But at the time when this film came out, I don't remember looking at the way he ran in this film and other films and thought it was funny. Because you felt like he was a legitimate badass certainly in his earlier films. And I think this film is really nicely put together. And they surrounded him, Seagal, quite cleverly with experienced actors. We got Pam Grier. The woman's legendary, really, and she really apparently quite liked this film because she was allowed to kind of show off her acting skills, and she's fabulous in this film. Sharon Stone had an early part in this film playing Seagal's wife. She doesn't get an awful lot to do, but she's there. And Henry Silva, regardless of what you think, plays an excellent villain in this film. Now, interestingly as well, this film was also offered, my understanding is, this was a film that was offered to Chuck Norris, but Cannon wouldn't let him out of his contract to do the film. But interestingly, this film is very, very similar anyway to a previous Chuck Norris film, Code of Silence, which is a film I do want to cover in this series of action films I'm revisiting. I will cover that in a few weeks, I'm sure. And interestingly, it shared the same director, Andrew Davis, and it shared the same actor playing the villain, Henry Silva. And apparently Seagal liked that film, which is why he chose Andrew Davis to direct this film. So, there's lots of coincidences there and all that kind of stuff. But I think as a debut for an action star, this was a really, really solid outing. You can look at debuts for other action stars, and while they might, tick a lot of boxes, there's other things that let them down, like the performances and things like this. Because the production values of this film are really, really solid. It's got a really, really top-notch, solid director in Andrew Davis. And it's got, a solid cast around Seagal. It feels like a hard-hitting thriller. And it's not... I remember thinking when I was younger watching this as well, it wasn't, ladled with martial arts everywhere. The martial arts in this film he only did it when he had to do it. They didn't kind of create scenarios for him to do the martial arts, generally speaking, in this film. A couple of moments here and there, but... most of the time he was doing it because he needed to save his life or somebody else's, sort of thing, in this film. So it made sense. So, yeah, I think the plot does get a little bit convoluted. But ultimately, like I say, I do think it kind of gets where it wants to go in the end. And it's one of those films that does make sense by the end. And it certainly got me excited at the time when I first saw this back in the probably early 90s. I first saw this. It got me certainly excited for more Seagal films, and then we certainly got some of those. So let me know in the comments what you think of Above the Law, or Nico as many of us knew it at the time. And of course, I will be back with loads more reviews and content on the channel very, very soon.